Well, I'm super excited to talk with you today. Very thankful for the time. I think to your point, what you had said earlier, so much of what we think of as American media today and these companies, you helped build or really shape. From, cable television to the earliest sports networks owned by the leagues themselves. So you've really been at the center of some of the biggest shifts in how we watch and experience media. But going back in time, I'm really curious. I know that you grew up in Seattle in the 1950s and eventually found yourself at Stanford for your MBA. At what point did you imagine your career path was going to be? Was media even on the radar when you were at Stanford at that time?
The I was so damn happy to get accepted by Stanford that I didn't even ask when I was offered a job. They didn't even ask. I didn't even ask what they did, but I was raised in a fairly poor environment, and when I was graduating from college, there were two pathways for me, which were very typical for white males in that era. First, all of us went in the army
Hmm.
because the war was on. And that was defining. 75% of my classmates at Stanford, myself included, were a veteran. And that gave a discipline to the women and men who had those roles that has not been repeated.
Hmm.
Doing a gap year or two or three at Goldman Sachs is not the same. Are you a manager or are you a server? You're supposed to go to work for Goldman Sachs, which is fine to do if you want, or whether you should work at a company and have a management role. And I think you're born to that decision. I spent some time up at Columbia a few years ago, just giving lectures when I had some time. And I was struck by how focused they were and the students. And they weren't focusing on whether they were supposed to run things or run things for other people. Um, the industry, the whole industry was characterized by something that Steve and I haven't talked about each other and would like to raise with you. If you go back to 1945, 1946, the war is over. We got the GI Bill for some of our students, some of our military, and everybody went off, and the average CEO made 10 or 11 times what his or her average CEO made. And that number is 430 today. The average CEO makes 430 times what his or her highest ranking employee makes. You're not a partner, you're a gladiator. And in the book, I said that the great sin is compensation. You're not a partner if you make 435 times your average employee. You're just not. And you have your hand raised at every opportunity to make a lot of money, and you take it. But what it's done to the industry is terrible.
Hmm.
The one industry that always had a lot of people around it was media. So coming out of the war, someone in the newspaper, someone in the television, the earliest cable systems started to come into play. And a characteristic that Steve and I need to spend more time on is every one of those businesses had little to no competition. That was the magic sauce. If in San Francisco, where I bought my first system, there were 9 operators in the Bay Area. 9. It was lunacy. The person who had a cable subscription in San Francisco, he didn't know which system he was on. He just knew he needed to watch television.
Hmm.
And so I put together a merger of all the systems from Seattle to Monterey. And instead of 9 operators, there suddenly was 1. Well, even if you're stupid, you can make money with one competitor. But you can also be more noble. If it's a highly competitive environment, you have to be careful that you don't use your stature, your positioning to the detriment of your customers and your employees. So in the book, it takes a CEO. I tried to just convey it does take a CEO. When I left Stanford, I went to work. This is my second year, and I came back from a class, and there was a note in my box to come and see the dean.
Mm.
Okay. Even then, I thought, oh fuck, I'm dead. They found out about me. They know I don't belong here, and so I went to see him. First, I talked to a friend of mine who encouraged me how to talk to him. I went and met this man, took a train up from Palo Alto up into the city, and he could have. I didn't ask what he did. He was so enamoring that I knew it would be a gift to work for him. And I worked for him for 10 years. He was the nation's, at the time, he was thought to be the nation's preeminent chief executive.
Mhm.
He was on the board of Wells Fargo, Chrysler, GE, Stanford Research Institute. There were 10 that he was director of. Well, by being his assistant, I was director of. I went to every meeting. And he was in the natural resource business. I had no interest in the natural resource industry. I just knew when I walked out of his office after roughly a 40-minute interview that if he offered me a job, whatever it was, I'd take it.
Mhm.
I don't think that the youth generation today, your generation, is as cognizant of the importance of being a premier provider.
Mhm.
And they're selfish, but they need to be selfish with that kind of money to be made. That's a lot of money. And you have six-figure incomes coming out of undergraduate institutions, let alone graduate institutions.
Mhm.
And it's so the characteristic that I want to talk to you about in the media industry is I took ownership of assets singularly in markets. There was 9 operators that became one in the Bay Area. If you couldn't make money with that asset, you were an idiot.
Mhm.
You had no competition. Earlier in the day, you had 9 companies competing against you, and nobody's that good. So I consolidated the industry in what was called the Summer of Love. And this 85% of the cable systems in America in a 1 year period of time changed hands.
Mhm.
And if you owned the left side of the street and I owned the right side of the street, we merged. We didn't ask what the valuations were, we just did it.
Mhm.
Well, I started my media career after I left Wall Street. I went to work for Chronicle Publishing Company in San Francisco. And what was interesting about that was I had no interest in being in the newspaper business, except it was San Francisco, and I sensed something powerful in the media asset business. But I was the only newspaper in town. We were the only cable system in town,
Mhm.
uh, and that you can do pretty well with that. What's happening now is nobody at the top tier of media uh, has a monopoly position anymore. Not even Netflix, the biggest of the
Mhm.
big. Everything you go home tonight, both of you, and there's no difference between Hulu, Netflix,
Mhm.
Apple. They're all the same. They're bigger, some than others, but they're doing exactly the same. I am not a fan of Netflix. I'm interested in what Netflix is showing tonight. That's it. And they're doing very well because they were the first arriver on the playing for it. But it's the same business model. The three of us could, in fact, if we wanted to go to a board meeting on Netflix, he'd fall asleep. It doesn't do anything that's clever, proprietary, and what's going to come, it's all going to come crashing down. If I asked you how many streaming services there are, you might say 10.
Mhm.
That sounds like a lot. There's 54. 54 streaming services that do nothing to differentiate it from the other 53, except they have this kind of programming, Disney, and you have this kind of program, sex and violence, and you have homemaking, but they're doing exactly the same they used to do, but nobody can maintain the proprietary aspect of that.
Mm.
So they will fail, because just because you have good programming tonight doesn't mean you're going to have good programming tomorrow night. And they're back doing two things that we said they would never do. They staggered the programming,
Mm.
so you can't binge watch. You have to go through the week or the 2 weeks to get all 10 episodes. We thought that was a disaster because it alienated the customer.
Mhm.
But if you gave them a good enough programming, they got through it. What the other big failure was, they gave them a button on the button on the remote that says zap the ads, and
Mhm.
so we made money by giving you a subscription. We made money by offering you advertising, General Motors, whatever, and we forgot that the customer hates ads and it hates bitching, and you're doing exactly the opposite of what it wanted to see. So
Mhm.
they will fail because there's no difference between Netflix and Hulu, none, same programming. Some of them will differentiate like Disney does,
Mhm.
a pure entertainment model. Others will focus on sex and violence. But generally speaking, it's the same product. And what's happening for you and your generation is, how do you fit in that? Uh, in a very Japanese-like fashion, I knew that somebody who works for me is not going to get fired except for incompetence. That's a nice way to have your career evolve, is to be able to do the best you can and not have to look over your shoulder. The point of American industry is to eliminate competition. And some of the earliest federal legislation between the First and Second Wars, what was about eliminating competition. There was only one U.S. Steel, one Exxon. Uh, just as a reminder to what I said earlier, I was the only guy on both sides of the street in San Francisco. You can be really smart, Steve, if you have no competition. But it comes with tremendous obligation. Your obligation to your employees and your community are transcendent. Don't mess it up. Remember, I hate this product called UFC. It's abhorrent. It's gladiators for this century. When I was running TCI, I had enough influence in the industry that I could stop it. I just said, the whole industry is not going to carry your programming. And they came and see me, and they I had to have security people because these guys are such animals. And I kept it off for 2 years. And then we merged with AT&T, and we merged on a Monday, and they committed to UFC on a Thursday. And I wrote to my new chairman of AT&T. I said, "How dare you? How dare you? How dare you marginalize women? How dare you?" The answer is, I can. Ryan Roberts is the best operator in our industry's recent history. I went to him. I went to him once and I said, "We need to put on a new channel just for women." And he said, "Why would I do that?" I said, "Because they only have one now, and there's 50 that focus on men, and there's none on women." "Well, I don't know why I have to do it, just because you say so." And I said, "Because I'll torture you elsewhere." But it's just annoying to watch the industry lose its soul. And what you and Stephen are doing is very good about bringing the soul back to the industry. but it's a heavy lift for you because you're starting in a competitive environment. I drifted into a competitive environment, but I also own the only franchise in San Francisco. And maybe I wasn't the person to run the system. Maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and Emma, you should run it. It was still going to be there. It wasn't going away. It was going to be there. And so competition in media doesn't have to be shits about it. They just don't. They are.
So I think you had mentioned this, that after Stanford, you became the assistant. Is it to Edmund Littlefield? Is that his name?
Yeah, that's his name.
So that's a big first job, as you mentioned. I'm curious, as you said, you entered his office. As you left, you would have taken any job that he would have given you. What do you think that he saw in you, and what did you take away from working so closely with him? And then, as a follow-up to that, what can people my age learn from your experience that you had with him?
But it starts and stops with the mentor.
Mm.
You want to glom on to somebody who you admire so much. You don't ask how much I'm going to get paid. You don't ask what I'm going to do. I just am here for you. And he was profoundly wealthy. I had two suits when I left Stanford. That's all I could afford. And I stayed home every Wednesday to clean my clothing till I could have three suits. And then I got to four, and then I was on my own. He saw in me somebody that would be loyal to him, loyal to the company, not greedy, and willing to work really hard.
Mm.
But
Lovely.
what I don't like about the current world is there's no camaraderie, there's no
Mm.
team playing, everybody's being greedy. It's all about money. And when the average CEO makes 45 times his or her average employee, you can't fix that person. Greed is kicked in.
Mm.
And the industry that most confronts society is the media industry. The steel industry doesn't have the issues that you and Steven are going to try to address. So it's a privilege to work in the media industry. It's daunting to think how much you could screw it up.
Yeah.
The other one, Hugh Hefner's daughter took over the company when he had Playboy, and um, she asked me if I would carry the Playboy channel. I said, no, I ain't going. I don't carry that stuff. We don't carry that. We don't do sex and violence. We don't. And that lasted a while too, until I left, and then I came back. But what I hate about the current generation is the best friends I ever had were the women or men sitting next to me in an office. Now I stay at home. I'm on the internet all the time. And that's just not healthy.
Mhm.
Also, it's terrible for the company. It's not efficient.
Mhm.
And I promise you're making mistakes. If you don't have the input of your fellow employees, you'll make a mistake. I did. I wasn't informed enough, and I was pretty informed. One issue I just missed it, just blew it. Fortunately, it didn't kill anybody, and he forgave me, so to speak. But it was stupid. It's careless. You got to be in a place where if you're careless but thoughtful, you're going to be taken care of.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And you had mentioned this, which one I adore that. I want to say I agree. I think you should be in a place where if you are careless and thoughtful, you are taken care of. And I think that that's lacking in my generation. But in 1997, you had mentioned Malone and how he tapped you in to succeed him at TCI. So explain to us, what TCI was and what was it like to have Malone hand you the reins to this large cable operator in the country? What was it like?
I felt like I earned it.
Hmm.
I didn't feel like I had stretched beyond
Hmm.
what I was entitled to. I worked in this thing I'll send Steve. It wasn't uncommon for me to go to work at 5:30
Mm.
and stay late. I could outwork anybody. And I felt I deserved it. I thought by then I was the most informed person in the industry. And my obligation was to the shareholders. That was the primary obligation. It wasn't to management. It was the management I'd have paid myself 450 times my competitor. Uh, it's finding a mentor early in your career, somebody who you can knock on their door late at night and say, I'm puzzled. What do you think? I'm not getting this straight. Which is why I hate the internet generation. Just hate it. Because I remember so fondly the women and men who supported me, and I in turn supported them. And they're all still in the industry. They're not having the kind of fun I had at all.
Mhm.
I had to sell the company to AT&T to make the most money for our shareholders. And John and I differed on that. I wanted to merge into AT&T, not because I loved AT&T, but they were going to pay a bodacious price.
Mhm.
John, who had the truer founder role, wanted to keep doing it. And I said, John, you can't. We can't. We got to get out of here. And we in 24 months, the stock price went up 5 times, and it worked perfectly. Except I lasted at AT&T about a year. Hated those guys. Frickin' phone company. I gave them their due though. So what's your next question?
My next question is about the Yes Network. So after cable, you launched Yes Network with the Yankees, which obviously went on to become one of the most valuable sports networks in the world. And I'm a huge sports fan, so I admire that. So I'm interested in what gave you the confidence that a team could build its own network and pull it off?
Because there's only one Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you live here in New York. You live in New York. Pick up a New York Post or Daily News today and see how much news hole is devoted to the Yankees versus the Mets. Mets and the Knicks versus the Nets. The What was happening is we had started 25 RSNs, and there was one market that we couldn't penetrate. They wouldn't sell to us. And so I worked it out with Steinbrenner, where he got 50% and my guys and I got 50%. And even today, I remember we were doing this arbitration with Jim Dolan at Cablevision, who wouldn't sign up. And I said to his dad, I said, Chuck, you can say we aren't paying you enough. You can't say you're not going to do it. You're going to do it because you don't have the strength to beat me when I take the Yankees off the net. And I went up to this old folks kind of hospice area on the other side of the bridge in Westchester, I think it was. And it was late at night, and I was trying to get good press. So we went there at night. They were all at their dinner, and they must have been 50, 60, 70 women and men in their 80s, Yankee fans. And I knew I'd win because they were so angry at Dolan for not carrying his Yankees. I said, just call him up and tell him he has to do it. And it's, I was trying to think, coming to this conversation, what is the imperative that I sometimes, even now, I found that I missed. It's all a competition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you're smart enough, or Steve's smart enough, or I'm smart enough in today's environment to sustain it. I just don't. That internet has no barriers on it, no fences. And to Steve's earlier comment, my fence was I had a piece of paper First cable system I bought when I started in media was in Nashville, Tennessee. And I liked the area. And I knew that I could fix it. I just knew it. So we bought it and fixed it. And once I got it in my head that you had to own your competitor, it really started to go really fast.
Mhm.
I have George Steinbrenner stories to tell you that'll put curl in your hair. And that's a bad guy. I was having lunch with in 21 in a pouring down rainstorm with George, his PR guy, and his operating guy. And I have no idea why I was there because I had nothing to do with the team. I had only to do with the network. And he didn't like we were going to announce the new stadium after lunch.
Mhm.
And it starts raining and it just poured. And George fired one of the guys in front of me at the lunch table. He said, "Get out of here." I go, "Whoa." I'm just eating as fast as I can. Nobody's ever ate a cry bluey quite that fast. I got my head down. This is not me. And he fired another one. Now he's down to just me, his PR guy, and him. So we go outside, and these other three guys are standing outside, and Steve will tell you, outside of 21, it's a deluge. It's the worst rainstorm in the history of the planet. These three guys are standing out there in the rain, waiting for George to invite them back in. And they got in the car. We had two cars. They got in the car, dripping,
Mhm.
because he told them to get out of his sight and wait for him. And they did. So it's a fun industry. I mean, it's all about people.
Mhm.
But I'd be really careful about this non-competitive environment.
Mhm.
I mean, the cable system in Nashville and the S network, same business principles. It's just that the Dolans had gotten greedy and couldn't hold on to it. So I came in and bought it at a fair price. And next thing you know, it's worth $3.5 billion. We valued it at 850 million.
Mhm.
And within a year, it was 3.5 billion.
Mhm.
Yeah. What's next?
Well, I have two more questions if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Lovely. Um, First off, just a larger question about Mrs. Lessons you've already kind of brought up, lessons you've learned. If you could take back one decision from your career or do something very differently, what would that be?
I don't think there are any.
Hmm.
Uh, the one mistake I made is I underestimated its underpinnings. It's a mining property,
Mhm.
and I should have been more careful in assessing its value. We didn't lose money, a lot of money. We lost some money, but I promised myself I'd never be careless again. I was
Mhm.
running around so fast that I missed something. And boy, I don't know you well enough, but I promise you and Steve are just the same way. You leave this call and you screw it up, you'll hate yourself. That's who you are. It's a good
Mhm.
place to be. It's a good place to work for you. Is it, you know, when I left Stanford and started my own cable company. Um, Trying to think what I started to say, I forgot. Well, it'll come back to me.
So when you think about, the first half of your career obviously before social media even existed, what's the biggest single lesson that you would want my internet generation to take away from your story?
The moral responsibility you have to not abuse that relationship that you earned. You earned it. But you can abuse it.
Mhm.
Rupert Murdoch's oh, he's a very good friend of mine, is an asshole. You know, why did he feel he had to be that way? Sumner Redstone was a bad guy. Jack Kent Cooke was a bad guy. There were a lot of bad guys. They could do it because they had these big platforms, but when you filled the bucket, there was no more place to put the water. And so you then 9 streamers went to 54 streamers, and they all started to lose money. John and I think we saw that. I think John and I saw that earlier than other people.
Mm.
The assets that we sold AT&T and then they sold on to Comcast, they didn't get out of those what we got out of the transaction with AT&T.
Leo, your book, It Takes a CEO, which I've got right here, it lays out a very powerful vision for what leadership should mean, not just in business, but in society at large. So interested in, what inspired you to write it and how those ideas have shaped your experience leading major media companies. And from there, we'd like to talk about your role as a trustee of the Sustainable Media Center and why this mission feels so important right now. So jumping into the first kind of larger question, It Takes a CEO, as I said, it lays out this philosophy of leadership. So, if you had to distill it into one or two core principles, what do you want people to carry with them after reading this book?
I think American industry and frankly all industry is hierarchical. And your obligation as a CEO is to give an environment to your employees that they can grow from, be sufficiently compensated for, and adopt sort of a team approach. And in the immediacy of the Second World War, when all of our GIs came back from Europe and Japan, the gap between the very top of society and the lowest portion of business, not society, was very narrow. And it stayed narrow until the 70s. And then in the latter part of the 70s, it began to explode. One of the most esteemed CEOs in the history of the country in business was Reginald Jones, or Reg Jones, from General Electric. Reg made 15 times what his average employee made. And the only reason it was 15 is because he was at the top. And he had this belief that if he went higher than that, it was unethical. And so he becomes CEO and he retires, and the new guys start coming into all of industry. And today, the average CEO makes 450 times his or her average employee. That can't be good. It can't be healthy economically, but it can't be good morally. And there's a difference between people who earn enormous salaries and pieces of income because they did something truly unique. Mm-hmm. It's not for me to criticize Bill Gates' compensation. It's not for me to LeBron James, Derek Jeter. These women and men did something unique, and they should be compensated for it fairly. But if you just have a job, if you just work for GE or GM or Ford or one of the big banks, if your income ever goes above 20 to 1 on your average employee, you should look in the mirror and decide if you have the ethics for this industry. See, I don't think you do. And I was very blessed. I went to Stanford Business School after the Army. And my first job out of Stanford was as the assistant to one of the premier chief executives in America. And I made $150,000 and he made $250,000. And that was a stupefying amount of money. And he was the one who articulated that salaries had gotten out of whack. But you have to be practical as well. If you have employees who don't feel that they're part of the process, or part of the company's ethics and values, they'll leave you behind. You'll do a very poor job. So why directors let people get away with that? And the answer is because they can. Mm-hmm. we heard in a presidential context earlier this week that the current president thinks he can do it because he can. Well, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so I felt there were sort of three blends there. You had to be ethical, you had to be loyal and partner-like, and you had to be fairly compensated. And if you go through the history of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they both bought into that. And now the abuse of income and compensation in the United States is pretty much party divided. The Republicans are more comfortable with exalted salaries than the Democrats. But it's very choppy right now, and it's very dangerous. You can't have a country or a business environment or a manufacturing environment where a small portion make all the money. Half the nation's income is owned by, I think, 3 or 4 individuals. It's crazy. It's crazy. So when I got out of school, I worked for a person who felt it was also crazy. I misstated myself earlier. My first salary coming out was $156,000. Ed made $250,000, and Reginald Jones made about the same. And that was just fine. Everybody loved it. Wall Street loved it. The shareholders loved it. And then because they could, they began to compromise at the director level. And you suddenly saw this phenomenon where the directors began to earn a lot of money. So it came time to address compensation. They gave a ton of money to the directors. So would the director approve the employer, the manager, getting overpaid, provided he did or she did, they would. And it's dramatic that you could go from the post-war period of 1945 to roughly 1975 and be very content with where the country found itself in terms of business practices, ethics, and values. And something went wrong, and that something was Ronald Reagan. When Ronald Reagan became president, it became hierarchical, and the rich became richer, and the poor stayed down below. And if you had told Reginald Jones or Ed Littlefield that their company was going to make 45 times, or 450 times what the average employee made, they said it's not possible. Not possible. So it's a very concerning time because it's only compounded with the Silicon Valley. And there are people in Silicon Valley like Bill Gates who should be compensated any way they want. It doesn't abuse these shareholders. These people are conducting themselves in very selfish fashion, and that's the problem.
Absolutely. And I'm very glad that you touched upon that and kind of talking and pivoting to, your experience in that role as CEO. As someone who's been at the helm of major cable and media companies, what was one of the hardest leadership decisions that you have had to make in that position?
Well, when I came into the industry, it was under stress. So my responsibility was to make it better. Typically, when you're a CEO, you save what you have because you like it, or you grow it because it's not big enough. My concern was the cable industry and broadcast in general are regulated environments. And so we had not conducted ourselves particularly well in the eyes of Congress. And so half of my duties were to fix the perception of the company in the industry. The other half was to run it better. I didn't find it hard. I found it concerning. I didn't think you could work any harder than I worked, and it still wasn't hard. It's still better than enough. But I didn't find it hard. I just was reminded of the responsibility you have as a CEO.
Absolutely. And you've talked about, building organizations that last. And I'm curious, what do you think today's leaders, and my generation that's going to become leaders, especially in media and tech, are getting wrong about that level of sustainability?
Well, what they're getting wrong is that this is a house of cards that may fail at one point. The media industry in the immediate post-war period of time was highly competitive economically, but not fractionally. And so the cable industry, you had one cable operator in town, not 10. One of my accomplishments was I consolidated the whole industry under a half a dozen companies. From several hundred cable operators, there were 5 or 6 at the end of this exercise that mattered. So they were much more competitive business-wise. But media didn't compete against each other. They competed within their industry, but not against other industries. And I was struck by how little we understood the industry. The reason broadcast has worked and movies have worked and cable has worked and radio has worked and broadcast worked is because for the most part, these people didn't have competition. One newspaper in town, 3 television stations, 1 cable operator, two or 3 radio stations, and that was it. And if you and I thought, well, let's go start another cable system, that would be foolish. There's one. Should we open another newspaper? No. Should we inculcate the environment with radio stations? No. You have to have a balance between competition and inside and compensation, not compensation, competition outside. But the newspaper operator, I started my media career in San Francisco after I left Wall Street and in the cable industry following a merger. And it was a wonderfully progressive environment. It was sensitive to women and people of color when it hadn't been historically. And but it began to fall apart. So now the cable industry is just a wire now. It's not an industry like we knew it. It's just a wire that you click onto and you watch programming. Netflix doesn't compete against Hulu. It's just in the same business as Hulu.
Mhm.
Comcast, a wonderful cable operator, doesn't compete. There are no other cable operators with which it competes. Now, it can do a bad job. And when I took over TCI, it was not well managed. But I knew I could fix that. The role for me was to find out where in the industry it belonged, where it should be situated, how it should conduct itself. And it was fun. And the reason it was fun is because we respected everybody. In a very short period of time, every employee of my company was a shareholder. Because if we were going to do well, we were all going to do well. And if we didn't, we should all fail at the same time.
Mhm.
I think I'm particularly well known for people and women of color and women. I think our workforce in a very short period of time was very balanced ethically. It was fun. It was fun. And nobody left our company unsatisfied, in my opinion. It was good.
So when talking about shareholders, how do you balance shareholder expectations with that duty that you felt to your employees and audiences and then the larger, broader public?
Well, because it's hard to do doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do it.
Mhm.
And when you're in charge of media properties, particularly grounded media properties, you can behave very respectfully or very poorly. I abhor this thing called the UFC. And when I was in charge of the industry for a while, we wouldn't carry it. I believe it's bestial. I believe it's gladiatorial. I think it's an insult to society. And so I was strong enough in my position. We didn't carry it, and if we didn't carry it, nobody else would carry it. We control most of the economics, and I just hated it. I hated pornographic broadcast materials. I hated UFC fighting. Geez Louise, you got this enormous opportunity and responsibility. Just do it well.
Mhm.
Look around you one morning, and if half of the people in the office aren't women, then try harder. Half of the women and men in the building aren't 12% African American and 20% Hispanic American. Work harder. You cannot feel comfortable about yourself if you don't have the companies you work for, the environments you're responsible for, look like this country.
Mm.
It's just it's an insult. But we merged into AT&T in the very week that the merger closed. AT&T added UFC fighting, added it to the dial. I almost cried. I look back here today and I say, are you responsible? Is your percentages of women employment, African American, Hispanic American, LGBTQ? The answer is not. I was of a generation in '65. We had the civil rights movement, and I was part of it. All of us at that time were part of it. And I bet myself that by '75, if you were a woman, if you were gay, if you were brown, if you're black, it'd all be better. And here we sit in this country today. We have a Supreme Court that thinks it might want to take away marriage.
Mhm.
After decades of trying to get it, they might take it away. And I'm scared for the country. I'm scared for the industry. You can have two kinds of programming. You can have uplifting programming.
Mhm.
I'm not a prude. If you want a cops and robbers piece of programming, have it. But be careful of the image you portray of women and people of color.
Mhm.
And that's not happening. It's not happening. The statistics do not suggest the improvement we saw by 1975 in 2025 has occurred by any measure. 50 years, and we're still, if you're gay, still if you're black, still if you're brown, still if you're gay, still if you're a woman, you're swimming upstream.
Mhm. No, I think that you're bringing up a good point, which is today's environment is uniquely challenging. And I think that a lot of the unique challenges, specifically in the media space, SMC is trying to address. So I think my next question is about, what drew you to the Sustainable Media Center's like mission at this point in your career and your life?
Well, because Steve Rosenbaum had lived in a better environment, knew what we had given up as an industry, and was prepared to try to put the genie back in the bottle. If there weren't people like Stephen, there was never going to be a cure. It was going to get worse and worse and worse. The internet and AI are scary. They're
Mm-hmm.
scary. They're so good on the good end, and they're so bad on the bad end. And in the post-Second World War period of 45 to 75, 30 years, the only biases that were troubling to me were mostly African American with Dr. King. But uh, we maybe we were just not sensitive to the issues. Firstly, we didn't have a lot of programming. We had 3.5 channels per household. Maybe it didn't work so well. We have hundreds of channels, hundreds. We have
Mm-hmm.
534 streaming services. And if you ask the smartest people in our industry, how many streaming services are there? They'll wrestle with their chin and they say, I'll bet you it's 13.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, well, it's 534. And if you are one, say, Emma, you're one of the CEOs of one of those streamers,
Mm-hmm.
and your whole success and your whole job, your compensation is based on getting viewers to your platform. If they don't come, we'll have to find somebody else, Emma, who will get them to come because we'll have to let you go. The problem with that is the only programming that I can promise you, is sticky. Sports is pretty sticky, to say the least. Sex and violence. That's it. Sitcoms, they don't make money. The 100 channels on the dial, they don't make money. There's a handful of them who will give you very racy programming, very adult programming. They buy up sports rights. And they're not making the world a better place like they should be.
And I have two more questions. One of them is it relates to my generation and advice you can give us because I think we need it. So if you could give one piece of advice to the next generation of leaders, especially Gen Z activists and entrepreneurs who are working within SMC, what would that be?
You have to start by believing it's worthwhile to do it.
Hmm.
That as talented, Emma, as you are, if you decided you wanted to be a barista, you're not going to be changing the industry like I hope you will. So if you believe that what you're doing is powerful and important, then do it. Then do it. But we know that right now, large parts of the country are abused by the media industry and exalted by it. Golly, it's a mess. It wasn't when we had 3.5 channels, and then we had 13, and then we had 100, and now we have hundreds. You should have seen it. You should have seen it creeping into no man's land.
Mm.
They didn't. And a statistic that's interesting to me is Silicon Valley historically is Democratic, and it's popular voting. The Bay Area, from San Francisco to San Jose, was very smart women and men, very smart, who were voted Democratic.
Hmm.
But through the last election in 2006, I'm sorry, 2004, we find that most of those young women and men, most of them, are not doing it right. And so they need, without you, Emma, and someone like yourself, and Steve, and someone like himself, what's going to make it get better? The answer is not obvious. And that's why Steve's work and your work is so important.
Mm. And the last question I have, looking at your career arc from CEO to author to advocate to trustee, what's your through line? What is the responsibility that you feel carries across all of it?
Diversity.
Mhm.
To respect the foundations of your country, and then you'll accept them of your industry. But media, we're not hardware stores. We're not restaurants. We are the vocal force for people. From the tiniest kid who watches Nickelodeon to the oldest adult, the responsibility is transcendent. With technology came responsibility. When you could only have three channels, three TV stations post-war, one cable system, one newspaper, it was easy to figure out what you should do right. Now go ahead and do it. But in the post-war environment, you were selfish. The newspaper. I worked for a company that had both newspapers, cable, and broadcast. They were different. And if you don't like what's happening, don't do it. Do the best you can otherwise. But I'm very worried about the politics of the country and its impact with the media industry. Media industry scares me to death right now in terms of values for our children, grandchildren. And here's Emma, I'll pay you $500,000 to do this. And you go, well, I don't need that much. They say, yeah, but I'm going to ask you to do some pretty dicey stuff. And it's just sliding downhill very fast.